Over the past several weeks, I began reading many Lex Luthor comics spanning various eras to truly grasp the core of his character. The key to understanding Lex is that he doesn't view himself as the villain, and it's that if we could see the world the way he does, maybe we would also come to the conclusion that Superman is a threat disguised as a hero who could very well destroy humanity. But the character didn't always have this complexity. Over the years, the motivations of the X have evolved in such a way that they represented the era of comics being lived through. From seemingly childish motivations to others that have to do with ideological and philosophical stances. In this video, we'll examine the evolution of my all-time favorite comic book villain. To find out how he changed so much, and above all, where does this deep hatred for Superman come from? My name is Go the Geek Monitor, and today we're going to take Lex Luthor very seriously. Today, discussing Superman inevitably involves mentioning Lex Luthor. During his first year, the Man of Steel focused on fighting realistic injustices rather than facing supervillains, like greedy businessmen and corrupt politicians. This changed in Action Comics number 13 when Superman faced a supervillain for the first time. It wouldn't be the X, but an earlier villain named Ultra Humanite. However, Ultra set a precedent since he had some traits that we now associate with Lex Luthor, such as great intelligence, boldness, arrogance, and a desire to dominate the world. Ultra was never a very popular character, but the idea that Superman's nemesis had to be someone very intelligent to contrast with the strength of the Man of Steel stuck around. So, a year later, Lex Luthor made his first appearance in Action Comics number 23 in 1940, where he was introduced as a red-haired criminal who tried to manipulate two countries into going to war so he could profit from the conflict. Months later, an artist would accidentally confuse him with Ultra Humanite and draw him bald, which gave him the characteristic appearance we know today. The important thing is that since his first appearance, Lex has been portrayed as this unscrupulous criminal genius who has great talent both for science and for manipulation. In another story from that period, Lex challenges Superman to a duel using his technology, loses, and seemingly surrenders. But in reality, it had all been a trick to keep the Man of Steel distracted and thus be able to steal a dangerous weapon. By today's standards, this isn't very impressive since Superman often battles several of his adversaries. But in the early 40s, this wasn't the case. In his early comics, Superman was never really in trouble and rarely struggled to solve things. Because he was much more powerful and intelligent than anyone else, so any problem he faced, including Ultra Humanite. By today's standards, a comic without any real conflict might not be very interesting. But in 1938, the concept of Superman was so innovative and fresh that kids simply enjoyed seeing Superman, using his great powers to deliver justice. Until Lex Luthor arrived, who basically became the first great rival that the last son of Krypton faced. So much so that in this comic from 1942, Lex gains superpowers after being shocked by an electric chair. Yes, just as we saw in All-Star, Lex steals Superman's powers and is about to defeat him for the first time in his history, using a magic gem worn around his neck. However, at the end of the story, Superman tricks Lex by appealing to his vanity, causing him to lose his necklace, which also became a recurring theme between these two characters. Despite Lex's genius status in the Detective Comics universe, his ego often becomes his Achilles heel, jeopardizing his plans and attempts to prove unnecessary points. Like in this comic, where he wants to prove to Superman that he's capable of running on the ceiling, but also because his huge ego keeps him from recognizing that Superman is also a very intelligent person, so he often underestimates him and gets tricked by him. That's something we've seen in a lot of stories with both characters. And personally, I find it really interesting to see how in these stories, the most common thing was that Superman would defeat Lex Luthor through cleverness, not power. However, it would be another 20 years before Detective Comics published an official origin for the character in 1960. A story in which finally Lex Luthor is given a personal motivation. And the most interesting thing of all is that it would come from the pen of one of Superman's original creators. I'm talking about none other than Jerry Siegel. The first time Lex Luthor met his greatest rival, he saved his life from kryptonite and invited him home to see his memorabilia collection, as Lex considered himself Superboy's biggest fan. They became friends, but a misunderstanding changed everything. Superboy built the Lexor, and Lex, grateful, made a formula to eliminate his kryptonite weakness. Unfortunately, an accident set Lex's laboratory on fire, and Superboy, when putting out the fire with his super breath, accidentally blew some chemicals onto his hair, leaving him completely bald. Since then, Lex believes Superboy was envious of him and vowed to destroy him, intensifying their resentment. Because during the following days, Lex develops several inventions to help Smallville, but each of them ends up accidentally causing problems that Superboy has to solve. Ultimately, the people of Smallville reject and belittle Luthor. Behind this cartoonish story lies a rather tragic origin. Because this comic shows us for the first time that behind this excessive ego, Luthor hides a great need for acceptance. He is a character who desperately seeks to be loved and blames Superman for not being loved. Above all, it shows a character who, in different circumstances, could have been Superman's and humanity's greatest ally. This comic was a major turning point. Because from this story on, the idea started to emerge that Lex wasn't this completely evil character we used to see before.
We began to witness a more nuanced and human Lex Luthor. This remains one of my favorite Lex Luthor stories of all time.
Because it tells us about a criminal who became a hero in another world and how he lost everything for not being able to see beyond his hatred for Superman. Lex challenges Superman to a powerless duel to resolve their issues definitively. Superman agrees and they travel to a red sun planet where he loses his powers. During the fight, Kal-El knocks Lex out, but bad weather forces them to seek shelter, pausing their battle. While doing so, Lex finds some primitive inhabitants who struggle to get water, and he uses the forgotten technology of the planet to help them. He helps them not because he's good, but because he may need their help in the future. Lex's plan succeeds, and he's surprised when the people cheer him as their hero, so he chooses to continue helping. Superman finds Lex and they continue fighting. Lex, aware that the planet's water is running out, chooses to lose the battle. He does it deliberately to return to Earth with Superman and find a way to send water to save the people. Superman realized that Lex could see beyond himself and sacrifice for others. The planet is then renamed Lexor, honoring its hero from another world. And for several years, Lex returns from time to visit and help his adopted planet, and even falls in love. But he's not able to stay for long because his hatred always brings him back to Earth until one day everything changes. After another humiliating defeat, Lex decides to flee to Lexor. Upon arriving, he discovers that his beloved Ardora had his child, so he chooses to remain there permanently. Deep down, he knows Superman will come for him one day. Tormented by the thought of losing his achieved life, he builds a powerful battle suit. When Superman finally appears and the battle begins, Lexor is accidentally destroyed by Luthor himself, who blames Superman for what happened. As he says, "You've taken my family and world from me. I thought I hated you as much as possible, but I was wrong. Until now, I didn't know the meaning of the word. I will come for you, Superman, because I'm just beginning to hate." This story provides a new context for Lex Luthor's hatred towards Superman. This motivation persisted for many years, until the crisis on Infinite Earths occurred. Do you hear that? If you're planning to make a purchase and want to support the channel, please keep watching. I'll provide more details now. You can do it using our Mercado Libre affiliate link. If you go to Mercado Libre using the link I leave in the description, they give us a small commission, which helps a lot. Currently, they have many Father's Day offers. And we prepared a list of only geek items with big discounts that might interest you. I mean, items with 40 or 50% off. Besides many cool Lex Luthor figures, you can choose from the entire Mercado Libre catalog if you don't find something you like on the list. You also help us. If
you want to help the channel, you can use our affiliate link.
Alright, let's continue with the topic. In 1985, Detective Comics did a massive reboot of its universe through the comic crisis on Infinite Earths, which meant a new origin for Lex Luthor. The writer in charge of this new era of Superman would be John Byrne, who was inspired by real people like Donald Trump, and he reimagined the character in such a way that he could represent a much more current evil with which audiences could identify. This was when Lex stopped being just an evil scientist and became a white-collar criminal. A millionaire who would use his economic power to manipulate people, the media, and even governments for his own benefit. How evil was this new Lex? Take a look at this segment.
It's him. I'm telling you, it's him. It's Lex Luthor, the richest man in the world. And he's just sitting there having breakfast? He asked for Jenny's table. I'm certain the tip he'll leave will pay her mortgage. Is there anything else I can do for you, sir?
Yes, can you keep me company for a while?
No, sir, I couldn't do that. I'm honored, Mr. Luthor, but our policy doesn't allow us to sit with customers.
I have no interest in your company's policy. Dear, if you already know who I am, I'm sure you know that I probably own this restaurant. You see, I own 90% of the state. Please, sit down.
Well, maybe a minute.
A minute? No, dear. I was really thinking more like a month.
What?
I asked for this month specifically because I'm inviting you to come with me to Metropolis for a month.
Mr. Luthor, I'm married, and even if I weren't, I'm not that kind of girl.
Oh, Jenny, if I've learned anything from my 8 wives, it's that they're all that kind of girl. It's just a matter of price. For some, it's a wedding ring. For others, it's a contract in Hollywood. I'm willing to offer you, let's say, $1 million. How does that sound to you? $1 million in exchange for a month of your life? Does that sound fair?
Maybe he's the richest man in the world, and he's used to getting what he wants. But if he thinks he can just come here and tell me what to do, he's very wrong.
Relax. Look around. Want to hear your life story? Past, present, and future?
You were born around here, in the shadow of that highway sign, the one that says Metropolis, 900 miles away.
You were a bright girl in the school play. You were a flower.
A butterfly?
Of course, a butterfly. You were a cheerleader, the most popular girl in school. You dated the quarterback and married him. You didn't study further because you couldn't afford it. And now you're 22 with a husband, a house, a mortgage, and in the future you'll have 3 or 4 kids. You have a television that shows you the world and a sign on the highway that reminds you of your dreams. 900 miles to Metropolis, Jenny. 900 miles toward tomorrow. $1 million buys a lot of tomorrows, and it'll only cost you a month. But think about it, I'll wait exactly 10 minutes in the car.
Jenny, what the hell was that? He offered me $1 million to go with him to Metropolis to do that. I can't even say it. For a month. He's waiting in his car for my answer. And will you do it? Pam, you can't be serious. It's not that, Jenny. No one will ever make me an offer like that, but you were always the most popular girl in school. Don't say that. That's exactly what she said. She told me my life story and made it seem so stupid, so absurd, and so boring. $1 million could pay you a new house. You could leave that jerk you're marrying. You know what? Forget it. I didn't say anything. But Jenny, Mr. Luthor already left. I've been waiting nearly 10 minutes, longer than usual.
This one required more attention. Cynthia seemed to have a slightly stronger moral fiber than the other girls I've played this game with in the past. But the outcome never changes. Jenny Hobart will never know what her final decision would have been, and this question will haunt her for the rest of her insignificant life. Now let's go home. Cynthia, yes sir. The new Lex posed a threat not only due to his inventions, but also his economic influence and ability to manipulate others with it. In fact, the people of Metropolis didn't see him as a threat, but as a charitable millionaire who constantly helped the city. Something interesting about this new Lex Luthor is how he takes up his original motivation again, but presents it through a different narrative. In this new version, Luthor felt like Metropolis's most powerful person until Superman arrived. As the press and applause focused on the Man of Steel, Lex felt insecure and rejected. A modernized adaptation of the narrative seen in Jerry Siegel's comic. The new version also retained other elements, such as Luthor's excessive ego, which caused him to ignore certain things. The fact that his own computer came to the conclusion that Clark Kent was Superman, something Lex dismissed as absurd. This new Lex Luthor version quickly became very relevant. Productions like Superman the Animated Series and Smallville adapted the millionaire and corrupt Lex Luthor seen in Round the Burn. Although it should be clarified that in Smallville, we also saw him as a close friend of Clark and the Kent family for several seasons before they became enemies. This side of comics that I love has unfortunately never been depicted in movies. In Smallville, Clark and Lex Luthor, a young genius studying the meteorites later known as kryptonite, had a friendship. He was a teenage millionaire who desperately longed to feel like part of a society that constantly rejected him. He often unintentionally humiliated others with his intelligence. In his loneliness, he befriends Clark Kent, another brilliant young man who shares his passion for astronomy. For Clark, stargazing meant dreaming of his origin world. And for Lex, it was the opportunity to make contact with a more advanced civilization, where he might fit in better. Above all, they were two lonely and alienated young men, so their friendship was crucial to them until everything changed. Both teenagers had problems, but Clark had a pair of loving parents who helped him deal with them, while Lex only had his money and an absent father. Lex built a kryptonite-powered machine to communicate with other worlds. When Clark first encountered it, his blood burned, causing him to cry out in pain. Lex misinterpreted this as fear of him. Make me ignorant. Stay away from me, Lex, I don't. Shut up, hick farmer. Do you think I don't know that look of fear? You, your parents, and everyone in Smallville are dead to me. You're no different from the rest. When Lex kicked Clark out, his machine exploded, which caused Lex to lose his father, his heir, and his only friend in the process. With this story, we can see how writers often take elements from a character's past and renew them. Like Lex and Clark's friendship, or Luthor's oversized ego causing him to err. Simultaneously, they propel new narratives. Recent comics reveal Lex's hatred for Superman stems more from ideological than personal reasons. An example of this is in the comic Lex Luthor, Man of Steel by Brian Nazarello, where they show us a Lex who believes in giving opportunities to those who don't have them. For example, in this comic, he genuinely takes an interest in giving a scholarship to the son of one of his workers, because he believes that anyone has the ability to transform their reality through hard work, just like he did. And something very interesting about this comic is that it graphically shows us how Lex sees Superman, a monstrously powerful character who is capable of intimidating anyone except him. Meanwhile, Lex is genuinely presented as someone who cares about the people around him. We also have the case of the comic All-Star Superman, where we see a Lex obsessed with working out, and with the idea of representing the pinnacle of human physical and mental achievement. But what happens when at the same time there is a Superman? One of the most fascinating takes on Lex Luthor's hatred is the ideological version. Superman poses not only a physical but also a philosophical challenge to Lex Luthor in certain narratives. And for Lex, the very existence of Superman represents a denial of everything he believes in. Merit, effort, and human ability to overcome limitations. Consider Lex's perspective. In a world where there is a perfect being who can do everything, what's the point of trying to be better? What's the point of hard work or resilience if we have a God at our disposal who can do everything much better and faster than we can? That's why Lex sees Superman as a crutch we don't need, one that weakens us as humanity with his paternalism disguised as heroism. It must be frustrating for him to see everyone applauding without realizing this. The worst part is that in his eagerness to bring down the monster he sees in Superman, Lex ends up becoming a monster himself. One capable of committing terrible acts just to prove that humanity is not beneath anyone, not even an alien god. Because for Lex, if the price of defending human dignity is getting his hands dirty, then it's worth it. And that pride blinds him to the point where he can't see that in his fight to prove humans don't need Superman, he has stopped being human himself. This is similar to what we saw in Lex from the movie Batman v Superman, since in the rooftop scene he mentions something called the problem of evil, which tells us that if a god can do everything and knows everything, then he can't be all goodness because evil still exists in the world. In other words, this Lex resents divine figures and is determined to prove that Superman is a false god against whom we must take action. Lex must set the example. This raises an interesting question. Without Superman's existence, would Lex be a force for good? Several comics seem to say yes, since throughout the multiverse there have been Luthors who are heroes, but many of them exist in timelines where Superman is a villain. Such is the case of Alexander Luthor from Earth 3, the only hero in a world of supervillains who has to face the crime syndicate on his own. In the Injustice storyline, Luthor actively opposes Superman's dictatorship. And another case we can mention here is Lex from the Red Zone comic. He's not exactly a hero, but he does carry out several beneficial actions in an effort to confront this tyrant Superman. It's also true that in general, Lex doesn't seek the destruction of Earth or its inhabitants. And in times of crisis, like the battle against the Anti-Monitor, the battle against Doomsday, and the invasion of the crime syndicate from Earth, Luthor teams up with Superman to save humanity, which is why I love his ending in All-Star Superman. Because in this comic, Superman in his last months of life asks Luthor that he is this symbol of good who always had the potential to be a true man of steel who protects humanity. Lex refuses. But after stealing Superman's powers and seeing the world as he does, Luthor has an epiphany that transforms him entirely. Because through the eyes of the man of tomorrow, he finally understands that we are all connected and that we are all we have. An idea that forces him to surrender and even to build in the animated version of this story. A successor who could continue the great legacy of the last son of Krypton. The most interesting aspect of Lex Luthor is that he's not entirely evil, and Clark occasionally brings out his better qualities. In the end, like every great villain in comic book history, Lex is a mirror through which we see our insecurities, our fears, and this very natural and human desire to feel accepted and to belong reflected. And that's why his struggle is so interesting. Because it's not about a physical battle against an alien he sees as a monster, but rather a struggle about what it means to be human. In a universe where Superman seems to prove that we are irrelevant, in a way, Lex represents a way to approach humanity's great dilemmas. What does it mean to be human? And how do we find our place when we feel like we're not enough?
The answer that Lex gives to these questions is often violent, tragic, or even monstrous, but we can't deny that each of his answers is also deeply human.
Maybe Superman represents the best that humanity has to offer, but we can't deny that Lex represents the average human. Those of us who do get burned when we fly too close to the sun. If you enjoyed this video, where I read numerous comics to understand a character, check out this playlist where I do the same with other characters. Remember, if you make any purchase on Mercado Libre, using our affiliate link in the video description helps us a lot. That's all for today. I'm Go. Keep looking beyond the obvious.